They shoved him hard into the metal chair. The room was dark, the air thick with sweat and betrayal. Fluorescent light flickered overhead. A suitcase slammed onto the table. One agent leaned in, eyes like ice. $1 million West, all yours. Just tell us, where is IBRAHIM Traoré's family hiding? Tamba. Doumbia blinked at the photo they threw in front of him. His childhood friend, now the president of Burkina Faso. His mouth went dry, his heart cracked. Loyalty was a warm memory. But his daughter was hungry, his future unclear. This is just the beginning. Stay tuned, because the secret's unraveling. Next, we'll shake a nation to its core. Tamba's hands were still cuffed. The metal dug into his wrists, but he didn't flinch. Two foreign men in gray suits stood across the table, watching him with the cold patience of those who had done this many times before. One adjusted his gold watch as if this interrogation were merely business. You fought in his army. You grew up with him. That makes you valuable. The taller one slid the briefcase closer. It clicked open. Inside, rows of crisp $100 bills stared, back like teeth. Unreal. Seductive. We're not asking for much, just information. Where they sleep. Who guards them. We'll do the rest. Tamba didn't look at the money. He kept his eyes locked on the photo lying flat on the table. It showed IBRAHIM Traoré at a school event, smiling beside a woman, his wife and two children laughing mid-motion. Tamba knew them, had held one of those babies the day she was born, had built a fence around the compound with his own hands. His throat burned. What happens to them? He asked quietly. The short one smirked. That's none of your concern. You get the money, you disappear, start over, Europe, Canada, wherever. A better life. A better life. The words echoed like a prayer soaked in rot. Tamba thought of Mariam, his daughter, only 12. She dreamed of being a doctor, but the school fees had dried up with his last paycheck. No one hired ex-bodyguards anymore, especially not ones loyal to the man the West quietly despised. What if I say no? The tall man leaned forward. You already said yes by walking in here. We own your next move. The room fell silent. The air conditioner buzzed overhead, failing to cool the room or Tamba's racing thoughts. One part of him screamed, "Take it." Another whispered, "You'll lose yourself." IBRAHIM was my brother, Tamba said finally. We used to share bread when we had none. Then share him now, the short one snapped, or you'll lose more than your pride. Tamba's eyes moved again to the photo. He remembered that smile, the way IBRAHIM used to laugh even when everything fell apart. The way they used to plan their futures while lying on rusted tin roofs, staring at stars they thought they could touch. The tall man stood closing the briefcase, softly. We'll give you 48 hours. If you walk out without a deal, we'll find someone else, but you won't like how we deal with disappointments. The cuffs were removed. Tamba stood slowly, legs stiff with conflict. One of the men handed him a burner phone. Call this number. Say the word gold if you agree. Outside, the sun was blinding. The silence of the compound hit harder than the men inside ever could. The guards let him pass without a word. They didn't need to say anything. They already knew who he was. He walked 5 blocks before he finally stopped. In the alley behind a shuttered market, he opened the briefcase again. The light hit the money differently now. It didn't shimmer, it sweated. He reached out and stopped. His fingers hovered over the bills like a man hovering over a grave. His phone buzzed. A message from Mariam. Papa, did you find work today? He stared at the words. A simple question from a child who still believed he was a good man. Tamba sat on the curb, closed the briefcase gently, and placed it beside him like a sleeping dog. His chest rose and fell, every breath a war. He didn't answer the phone, not yet. He didn't call the number, not yet. And the money sat quietly waiting for a decision that could betray a nation or begin to save it. The wind in Kudugu used to carry dust and laughter. 25 years ago, it was the sound of goats wandering near clay huts, pots clanking over firewood, and 2 boys racing through alleyways barefoot, dodging chickens and old men's curses. Tamba Doumbia was always just a step behind IBRAHIM Traoré, not because he was slower, but because IBRAHIM ran like he was chasing the future, not escaping the past. And even as a child, Tamba knew his friend was different. They were both sons of farmers. Their fathers had worn the same calluses, carried the same loads to the market, and drunk from the same shared gourd under the baobab tree. But it was IBRAHIM. Who dared to question why imported wheat cost more than local millet? Who stood up when the colonial inspector slapped an elder and said, "Not again"? Tamba had been the one to pull him back that day, whispering, "Let it go." But Ibrahim had shaken his head and said, "Some things were not meant to swallow." Their bond was built in heat and hunger. They studied by flashlight. When the power flickered, shared cassava when one of them had none, and whispered plans late at night. Ibrahim dreamed of a united Burkina Faso, free from debt and shame. Tamba dreamed of becoming his shield. "You'll be president," he'd said once, half joking, half in awe, "and I'll guard your back so they never touch you." The memory burned now. Tamba stood on the edge of a dirt road, watching the last truck rumble away from the closed compound. The briefcase in his hand felt heavier than it should. He adjusted the strap on his shoulder. But it wasn't the weight of money dragging him down. It was the weight of that night 25 years ago when he and Ibrahim had sat on an overturned bucket behind Ibrahim's grandmother's house. They were just boys then, no older than 12. It had rained hard that day. The red mud was still thick under their feet. Ibrahim had unwrapped a small bundle, a half loaf of bread and 2 boiled eggs stolen from Ma's kitchen. He'd grinned. Tamba had laughed. "She'll skin you alive only if she finds out," Ibrahim had whispered, handing him an egg. "Besides, we're rebels now. We need fuel." They had eaten in silence for a while, the kind that only came between two souls who didn't need to explain themselves. Then Ibrahim said it. "One day I'll change this country. I'll fight with words, not guns. But I'll need someone beside me, not behind me, beside." Tamba hadn't said anything. He just nodded and passed the last piece of bread back. That's what brothers did 2.5 decades later. He wondered where that promise had gone. What had made him walk into that gray building? What hunger had he been feeding? He glanced at the briefcase again, still locked, still mocking him. Across the street, an old woman sold roasted corn. Her skin was like weathered bark, her eyes sharp. She looked at Tamba and frowned, then pointed at the case. "Looks like a trap," she muttered. In myrrh, her voice rough as gravel. Tamba bowed slightly in respect. "Maybe it is." She nodded once and turned away, uninterested in excuses. The sun was setting over Ouagadougou. The mosque call had just ended and children chased each other between parked cars. Tamba began walking again. Not fast, not slow, just walking like a man carrying something he couldn't drop but didn't want to keep. He passed a shoeshine boy who shouted, "Uncle, you look rich today," and then burst into laughter. Tamba managed a tight smile but kept walking. He didn't know yet where he was going, but in his mind he could still hear the sound of 2 boys under a baobab tree. He could still taste the boiled egg and hear Ibrahim's voice clear as the wind that once swept the village clean. Beside, not behind. That was the promise. And now with every step the question clawed deeper into him. Was there still time to keep it? The market in Ouagadougou was always loud, always alive. Stalls burst with colors, scarves hanging like flags, bowls stacked with spices, tomatoes glistening under the sun. But beneath the rhythm of bartering voices and the clang of coins, whispers moved like smoke. Not everyone heard them, but those who listened closely knew something had shifted. "Tamba Dumbia's back in town," someone muttered near the peanut oil stall. "He left broke. Now look at him." Another replied while thumbing through okra, new boots, fresh shave. "Look at that wristwatch. Swiss. He must have sold something or someone." It wasn't said loudly, but it didn't need to be. The words passed from stall to stall, carried on glances and half smiles. No proof, just knowing. Near the end of the row, beneath a faded umbrella, a tall man sat polishing second-hand radios. He hadn't spoken yet, but his eyes followed Tamba, closely. He remembered that walk, that square jaw, the way Tamba's shoulders never fully relaxed. Even now it was B, a former infantry sergeant who once served 2 deployments with Tamba in the north. Now he sold electronics beside vegetables and dried fish. He had stories, and he had a memory like stone. He didn't say anything as Tamba passed, just nodded slowly. Tamba met his eyes, slowed his pace, but didn't stop. The silence between them was louder than anything said in the market that day. Later that evening, Tamba stood outside a weathered mud brick home on the edge of the city. The roof sagged slightly, the door hung crooked. A chicken wandered near the step, pecking at invisible things. He raised his fist to knock, then lowered it. This was the place that had raised him, where meals were scarce but hands were always warm. Inside, his mother sat propped on a mat, her legs covered in old kente fabric. The illness had taken much from her strength, her voice, but not her eyes. They still burned with the sharpness of a woman who had raised 3 children alone. She saw the suitcase first. Her jaw tightened. "You bring that here?" she asked, voice dry as dust. Tamba set it gently near the wall away from her mat. "I came to see you." "You came to hide," she said, coughing into a cloth. "That's not the same." He reached for her arm, but she pulled it away. "I brought medicine from the clinic in Cosido, stronger than what the local nurse gives." "Medicine doesn't fix shame," she said. He sat down beside her mat, resting his hands on his knees. The silence between them stretched like cracked earth before rain. "They offered me money, Mama," he said softly. "I didn't take it." "Not really." "Not yet." She turned her face to the window. "Not really," she repeated. "That's the kind of answer a man gives when he's already halfway to being someone else. "I didn't give them anything, I didn't speak." "But you listened," she said. "You carried their money, you stood in their room," his jaw clenched. "I wanted a way out for Miriam, a school, a future." "No amount of money," she said, voice rising for the first time, "can buy peace for a troubled soul." He looked at her, then down at the dirt floor. She used to say that when they were kids, when his father died, when his brother was caught stealing, when the rains didn't come. She looked at him now, softer. "You remember who you are, Tamba. Not who they say you are, not what they want you to be." Outside, the wind picked up. Dogs barked in the distance. A radio blared political talk from the neighbor's shack. Words like loyalty, corruption, foreign, influence. Tamba rose and kissed his mother's forehead. "I'll come back tomorrow." She didn't respond. She just stared at the briefcase as if it might grow teeth. As he walked back toward the street, Bila stepped out from behind a rusted gate. "You think no one sees you, but the ground remembers your steps?" Tamba turned, startled. "Bila, since when do soldiers carry suitcases?" Bila's voice was calm but sharp. "You came back with quiet shoes and loud money." Tamba didn't answer. "I fought beside you," Bila said. "I buried brothers beside you. Don't make me watch you bury yourself." Tamba opened his mouth to speak, then stopped. "Whatever they gave you," Bila added, "it's not worth what it's already cost." The wind shifted. A bell rang from the nearby mosque. Tamba looked up at the sky, wondering how long a man could run before he stopped recognizing his own shadow. The lock clicked with a tired groan. Tamba hadn't opened that drawer in over a decade. It was tucked beneath the floorboard in his bedroom under an old woven mat. Most people didn't know it existed, not even his daughter. The key rusted and bent slightly from time still fit. He paused for a moment, staring at the wooden panel before slowly lifting it up. The smell hit first paper dust and something like dried leaves, the kind of scent that carried memory. He reached in and pulled out the bundle wrapped in faded blue cloth. Gently, carefully, he unfolded it. The yellow folder was thinner than he remembered. Its corners were worn soft, like the hands that had once held it every night before sleep. The paper inside was fragile now, lined with age. His fingers trembled as he opened the first letter. "Tamba, brother." The handwriting was neat, slanted, full of energy Ibrahim had always written, like he was racing his thoughts. Tamba could almost hear the young voice again, proud and hungry. "I saw a French officer kick an old man today. I didn't move. Not because I was afraid, but because I was alone. One day we won't be alone. We'll be soldiers of our people with books in one hand and justice in the other." Tamba closed his eyes. That was the year they were 16, the year of drought, the year their school closed down for 2 months. They'd spent their days collecting firewood, watching goats, dodging soldiers. But even then, Ibrahim had been speaking of freedom, not for himself, but for everyone. He turned the page. "The elders are tired. I can see it in their eyes. But we are not tired. Not yet. Burkina Faso isn't just a name. It means something. Upright people. We have to live up to it." Tamba wiped his cheek. He hadn't noticed the tears until they dropped onto the page. He stared at the spot, the blurred ink, as if it could erase what he'd nearly done. There were more letters. One spoke of organizing a food cooperative in their village. Another dreamed of a radio station that spoke only local languages, and one written late at night, judging by the smudges, spoke about his fear of losing himself in politics, of becoming what he hated. If I ever forget where we came from, remind me. If I ever grow cold, bring me fire. If they turn me into a symbol, just call me by my name. Tamba pressed the letter to his chest. It was as if Ibrahim had written these words for this very moment. A warning, a cry, a thread pulling him back. The suitcase sat in the corner of the room, still unopened since he brought it home. Tamba looked at it now, as if it were some wild animal crouched low, waiting to pounce. He stood up and walked to it. With a sharp motion, he opened it again. The money stared back, stacks of green, untouched, unmarked, clean and cold. It didn't shimmer this time. It felt hollow, loud, insulting. He took one stack out and held it next. To the letter, what could this money buy? A house, a school abroad for Miriam, a better doctor for his mother. But at what cost? He dropped the money back into the case, then shut it hard. This time he locked it. The sound echoed through the room. His breath came heavier now. His shoulders sagged. He reached into the folder again and pulled out the last piece of paper. A photo faded, torn at the edges. It was of him and Ibrahim, barefoot, grinning, arms draped over each other's shoulders in front of a broken wall with Dignite scrolled in charcoal behind them. They were boys. They were everything. Tamba sat back down on the edge of the bed and stared at the image until his eyes burned. Then he placed it back in the folder, rewrapped the cloth and tucked it into his jacket. There were some things left worth saving, and maybe not everything was lost. The guard noticed at first a flash of light on a rooftop 2 houses down. It was almost nothing like sunlight catching glass, but Corporal Isuf had been trained to spot things that didn't belong. He narrowed his eyes, shifted position behind the compound wall, and tapped the small earpiece tucked into his collar. Possible lens, western corner 2A. Another voice crackled and confirmed sweep team moving within minutes. 4 plainclothes agents circled the block. They moved with precision. Radios, silent weapons concealed. At the same time, inside the compound, Ibrahim's children were brought indoors and the perimeter locked down. The family's chef was told to stay in the kitchen. Even the dogs were leashed in silence. Inside the president's office, General McCain Diarra laid 3 photographs on the desk. Surveillance stills, grainy but clear. A silhouette kneeling behind a clay chimney. A gloved hand adjusting a telephoto lens. And the last one, the most damning, a license plate. IBRAHIM TRAORÉ didn't speak. His fingers drummed the desk slowly. The general cleared his throat. We tracked the vehicle. It's rented under a shell company tied to an embassy. Which one? European, not American, not African. Their security attaches claims it's a rogue asset, and we traced movement patterns. They weren't tracking your office, they were tracking the school your daughter attends, and the route your wife uses for her evening walk. Still, Ibrahim said nothing. The general leaned closer, lowering his voice. Sir, we also found something else. He reached into a folder and pulled out a name. Tamba Doumbia. Ibrahim looked at it for a long moment. He didn't plant the device, the general said, but he made contact with someone who did. Ibrahim didn't ask how they knew. He trusted the intelligence network they'd built, trusted the silent professionals who gathered information the way others gathered fruit deliberately, respectfully but with sharp tools. A name from the past, the general added. But this betrayal cuts deep. Still no reaction. Outside the window, the sun was beginning to slide toward the horizon. Birds scattered across the rooftops, the sound of children playing had disappeared. Even the street dogs were quiet. Ibrahim finally spoke. Bring him publicly. No. Quietly. No threats. No chains. Sir? You want to see him? Ibrahim nodded once. Alone. The general hesitated. He may be compromised. Then I'll know by how he breathes, Ibrahim said. Later that evening, just as the call to prayer echoed across the rooftops, Tamba stood outside the iron gate of the presidential compound. He had not been summoned by force. He had come on his own, answering a message delivered by a child on a bicycle. No signature, just a date and a time. The guard stepped aside. He passed through the first gate, then the second, past the garden, past the old mango tree they had planted during the campaign. He knew this place well, too well. He had helped build its walls, walked these paths in shadow and in sunlight. At the main door, an aide waited but said nothing, just nodded and opened the wooden double doors to the private study. Ibrahim was already seated inside, not behind the desk, but in a wooden chair by the window. A small tea table stood between them. No bodyguards, no tension in his shoulders, just the presence of a man who had carried power long enough to know when to put it down. Tamba entered slowly. "Have a seat," Ibrahim said softly. He obeyed. Neither of them spoke at first. Tamba's heart thudded in his ears. He watched the president pour 2 cups of tea. No sugar, no milk, just the way they used to drink it when they couldn't afford either. "I read your letters," Tamba said finally, voice almost cracking. "All of them? I kept them, Ibrahim." "I know," Ibrahim replied. "That's why you're here." Silence stretched between them again, thick and tight. Tamba reached into his jacket and pulled out the yellow folder. "I didn't give them anything, but I didn't stop them either." "I know that too. Why didn't you have me arrested?" Ibrahim didn't answer. He sipped his tea. Then he looked out the window and said, "I needed to look in your eyes, and now I have Tamba," swallowed hard. And still the silence held. The guarded room was still but tense. No windows, just 4 concrete walls. 1 wooden table and 2 chairs positioned across from each other like opposing sides of a quiet war. A single fan rotated above, slicing the heat into slow, useless pieces. Tamba sat with his hands resting on his knees. He didn't move when the heavy steel door opened. Ibrahim entered alone. No guards, no advisors, just him. He didn't sit right away. He placed a worn yellow folder on the table and stood behind the chair, his hands resting lightly on the backrest. Tamba's breath hitched. He recognized the folder. Every scratch, every faded fold, it was his. Ibrahim looked down at it, then finally met Tamba's eyes. "I trusted you." 3 words. No anger, no tremble, no fire. Just wait. Tamba's eyes dropped to the floor. His voice came out hoarser, barely more than a whisper. "I know." Ibrahim sat down slowly. The folder stayed between them like a wound that couldn't be closed. "I didn't sell you out," Tamba said, "but I went. I listened." Ibrahim didn't speak. They said they'd help. "Miriam," Tamba continued. "She got a scholarship offer in Europe, but the paperwork stalled. They knew, they used it, said they'd fix it, get her out. Better hospitals, better schools." He stopped, swallowed, looked away. "I never thought it would go that far," he whispered. "And when they showed you the money?" Ibrahim asked. "I carried it home. But I never opened it again. I locked it away. I couldn't throw it out, but I couldn't touch it either because you knew," Ibrahim said. Tamba's shoulders collapsed. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like a man in prayer. "I didn't want to hurt you, I swear it. I was desperate. My mother's dying. My Am's growing up. And me? I'm just a man watching everything slip away." Ibrahim listened. That was worse than shouting, worse than fury. He just listened, eyes fixed, unmoved. "I kept your letters all these years," Tamba said. "I thought they would keep me grounded, and they did until they didn't." A long silence filled the room. The fan spun lazily above them. Somewhere outside the compound a bird called once and then stopped. Ibrahim reached into the folder and pulled out 1 letter. He didn't open it. He just held it between 2 fingers. "Do you remember what you wrote on the back of this one?" he asked quietly. Tamba nodded. "If I ever fall, pull me back." Ibrahim looked at the folded paper. For another moment, then returned it to the folder and closed it. "I read those words again last night," he said, "and I wondered, how do you pull someone back who doesn't know how far they've gone?" Tamba's throat tightened. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words stuck. "I trusted you with my family," Ibrahim said, softer now. "Not just my safety, my children, my wife. You knew their faces, their routines." Tamba nodded, unable to lift his eyes. "They knew too much," Ibrahim said. "Because someone told them where to start looking. It was never specific. I never gave them details," Tamba said quickly. "I swear it, but maybe silence is its own kind of betrayal." Ibrahim pushed the folder gently across the table. "Take it. Keep it." Tamba didn't reach for it. "I'm not here to punish you," Ibrahim said. "I'm here because I needed to see if you were still the man I once called brother." "And am I, Tamba?" asked, his voice cracked and desperate. Ibrahim stood, looked at Tamba long and hard, then turned toward the door. His hand paused on the handle. "You'll answer that better than I ever could," he said without looking back. Then he opened the door and walked out, leaving the yellow folder, the spinning fan, and a broken man in silence. They didn't lock him in a cell, but Tamba knew better than to believe he was free. The compound they took him to sat on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, surrounded by high walls and thorned wire. There were no bars on the windows, but cameras watched his every step. The guards didn't raise their voices or threaten him. They didn't need to. Every movement was measured, every silence intentional. The message was clear. He was under protective custody, not imprisonment, but the line between the two was thin and shifting. He stayed in a plain room with a cot, a desk, and a bathroom that barely drained. Meals were delivered on time, but without a word. The guards nodded, respectful but distant. They were trained for this. Not to intimidate, but to contain. 3 days passed before anyone spoke to him again. On the 4th morning, a tall man in a brown uniform entered the room with a folder under his arm. No rank insignia, no name tag, just quiet eyes and steady steps. "Mr. Doumbia," he said, pulling the chair back and sitting across from him, "I'm not here to punish you, I'm here to understand." Tomba said nothing. The man placed the folder on the desk and opened it. Inside were photos, transcripts, maps, faces of men and women. Tamba had only seen in passing. One in particular made his stomach turn. A pale woman in dark glasses, always present at embassy functions, once introduced as a trade advisor. Another was a man with silver hair, usually dressed in tan suits and known for his charm in social circles. "Do you recognize them?" Tamba hesitated. Then he nodded. "The woman's name is Elva Kasayer. The man is Julen Maro." The agent didn't write anything down. And their connection? Tamba shifted uncomfortably. "They approached me through a middleman. I met them twice. Once at a hotel, once in a car. They were never aggressive, just precise. They knew who I was, knew about Mariam, about my mother's illness. They told me it didn't have to be treason, just cooperation, intelligence, movement patterns, logistics." The man leaned back. "Were you paid?" Tamba glanced at the corner of the room where he knew the camera was blinking red. "They gave me a briefcase. I never spent a single bill." "And the network? They've embedded themselves inside ENOS and cultural programs. They host scholarships, sponsor education initiatives. But their real work is deeper, stealing telecom data, planting moles in military units, pressuring rural leaders with offshore bank accounts and vague threats." He took a deep breath. "They want to destabilize more than just Burkina Faso. They want confusion across the region so the West can come in with clean hands and say they're helping." The room was still. The man across from him finally opened the folder again and slid out a document. "You realize that what you're saying will provoke international backlash?" Tamba nodded. "Then let them come. But they won't come in uniforms. They'll come with contracts, with press releases. They'll call it cooperation, security, assistance, foreign aid." The man closed the folder and stood. "That's all for today." As he left, Tamba sat alone for a long time, staring at the empty chair across from him. The next day, a woman from the legal team entered. She brought paper, a recorder, and a list of names. He confirmed 2 rejected, 3 hesitated on 1. "They're not all agents," he said. "Some are just greedy, some don't even know what they're part of." She looked at him with careful eyes. "But you did." "I did," he replied, "and I still walked in." She didn't comfort him, just took her notes, and left. By the end of the week, Tamba had given everything he knew. Dates, locations, passphrases, burner numbers, drop points, hidden inside community development offices. It was all there under layers of goodwill and paperwork. He was watched, but not silenced. One morning, he opened his door and found a folded newspaper placed on his desk. The headline read, "Foreign Hands in African Shadows. President Orders Investigation." There was no byline, no mention of him, but he knew it had begun. Ban Danoi. Part 8. The Western Operation Instruction. A back room in a European capital. Agents panic as news of the leak spreads. A shady executive makes a call. Plan B discredit him. They release doctored footage of Tamba allegedly plotting against the president. Social media explodes. Tamba becomes hated overnight. Lou Viet 800 to logic in a sleek back room beneath a government building in a European capital. The walls were lined with screams and silence. Thick carpets, Muffled footsteps and a faint hum from the overhead lights pulsed like tension itself. Men and women in tailored suits moved like shadows around the conference table. Eyes fixed on the monitors, showing headlines from West Africa. At the center of the room, a projector played the breaking news loop from Ouagadougou. Subtitles ran across the screen in French and English. Burkina Faso investigates foreign interference. A woman with platinum hair and sharp eyes stood near the wall, arms crossed. Elva Kassayer. Her jaw was tight, lips pursed. This wasn't supposed to escalate. He was a weak link. Disposable. Julian Morrow leaned forward in his chair, phone in hand, scrolling. The leak hit too hard. They've already frozen 2 accounts. Our telecom contact in Abidjan vanished this morning. A younger analyst spoke up. Trial's team isn't just reacting. They're counter-offensive. We underestimated him. Across the room, a door opened. A man in a charcoal gray suit walked in. No badge, no introduction. But everyone stepped aside. He was older, weathered, but elegant. The kind of man who didn't speak unless every word was preloaded with consequence. "Where's the asset?" he asked. "Contained, but not neutralized," Elva said. "And the whistleblower, Tamba Dumbia, former presidential guard. Our records show no formal agreement, no signed documentation, just verbal contact." He's going off script fast. The man nodded slowly. "Then it's time for Plan B." Elva blinked. "You're certain? Discredit him publicly fast. If we can't erase him, we erase belief in him." He picked up a secure phone and dialed without hesitation. "Upload the package. Use all channels. 24-hour cycle. Target youth audiences. Local dialects. Full push." Moments later, in a digital command center elsewhere, technicians deployed a carefully edited video. It showed Tamba in a grainy hotel room seated across from a blurred figure. The audio was doctored, clipped to suggest treason. "Traoré is no longer useful. The West needs new friends." That line didn't exist in reality, but it didn't have to. Within an hour, the video flooded social media in Burkina Faso. Telegram, WhatsApp, TikTok, YouTube. Memes spread like wow. I held fire. Some painted Tamba with blood-red eyes. Others showed him as a puppet dangling from foreign strings. Hashtags trended by nightfall. "Tamba the traitor sold our soul." "Burkina betrayed." The reaction was immediate. In the markets of Ouagadougou, vendors who once greeted him with silent nods spat at the mention of his name. A man in a nearby village ripped down an old campaign poster where Tamba once stood beside Ibrahim in military fatigues. At a school in Koudougou, Mariam was pulled aside by teachers. Parents whispered when she walked by. One boy threw a stone at her as she left the gate. "Traitor's child," he yelled. She didn't cry, she just kept walking, fists clenched. Back inside the compound, Tamba sat in the same room as before. The folder still rested on the desk. The door opened, and a junior aide entered holding a tablet. "You need to see this," he said, sliding the screen across the table. Tamba watched the video in silence. His face stared back at him, lips moving words he never said, twisting into venom. He didn't flinch, but something behind his eyes cracked. "They'll believe this," the aide said quietly. Tamba didn't respond. "What do we do?" the young man asked. Tamba looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into the folder and pulled out a small envelope. It was sealed in wax marked with an old emblem, the kind Ibrahim used when they were organizing from basement and empty fields. He slid it across the table. "This is everything I haven't told yet," he said. "Every name, every transfer coordinates, documents, real ones, not just rumors." The aide stared at the envelope. "Give it to him when he's ready," Tamba said. "Not before." He stood up and walked to the window, listening to the distant sound of protesters chanting outside the walls. He knew what came next. He had survived war, hunger and shame. But this was a new kind of battlefield. One where truth had no sound and lies had a louder voice. The meeting room in the presidential palace buzzed with tension, though no one raised their voice. The long oval table was surrounded by ministers, advisors, generals, and strategists, all waiting for a word from the man at its head. President IBRAHIM Traoré sat with his fingers steepled, eyes downcast as reports were read aloud. Aides rotated in and out, updating with new poll numbers, fresh footage, whispers from the street, and every few minutes, someone glanced toward him, expecting a directive, a command, some visible reaction. But Ibrahim said nothing. The room filled the silence with opinions. "We can't ignore this," said Minister of Interior. "Dama Wedra. He needs to be tried publicly. Treason must have consequences." A younger advisor pushed back. "The footage is fake. The timestamps don't align." His voice patterns were altered. "We have proof, but people don't care about truth, they care about noise." The Justice Minister tapped a pen against her notebook. "If we delay action, we look weak. If we rush it, we feed chaos. Either way, we lose ground." General Diarra crossed his arms. "It's deeper than Tamba. This isn't about one man. It's a campaign, a multi-layered assault. The French, the banks, the media. They want your credibility broken, not your body, and they're using your silence as bait." Still, Ibrahim said nothing. Another minister cleared his throat. "Sir, with respect. If we don't act, the streets may take justice into their own hands." Ibrahim finally looked up and the room went still. "I've read every word Tamba gave us," he said, voice calm. "I've seen every message, every document. What he gave us is more than what many men would give at the height of their loyalty." The room shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded slowly, others bristled. "Is it not betrayal?" Minister Dama asked. Ibrahim turned to him. "Is it betrayal if he turned back before the damage was done? If he walked out of the room with the briefcase but not the knife?" Silence again. He stood. The room instinctively stood with him. "I'm not commenting publicly," he said. "Let the noise rage. Let them speculate. I don't serve headlines. I serve the people." He stepped out before anyone could argue. In the hallway, 2 guards saluted. He returned it, then walked through the corridor until he reached a small wooden door behind the administrative wing. He entered alone. The room inside smelled of incense and old pages. Books lined the walls, scripture, poetry, philosophy. A small window let in soft evening light. On the floor sat an elderly man in white robes, legs folded, eyes closed. Ibrahim knelt across from him without a word. The man opened his eyes slowly. "You carry too much in your chest, my son. They want me to condemn him," Ibrahim said. "And what do you want?" "I want to believe that people can lose their way without being lost forever." The old man nodded. "Then believe that. But know this. The more power you hold, the harder it becomes to forgive without looking weak." "I know," Ibrahim said. "But weakness doesn't frighten me. Becoming like them does." The old man reached for a worn leather-bound book and opened it slowly. "There's a passage you once asked me about many years ago. Do you remember?" Ibrahim looked at the floor, then nodded. The man read aloud, "Blessed is the one who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of mockers, but whose delight is in truth." He closed the book. "Your people are watching, not just to see what you punish, but to see what you protect." Ibrahim sat with that for a long moment. Finally, he whispered, "If I punish every man who stumbles, who will walk beside me when I fall?" The old man smiled softly. "There's your answer." That night, Ibrahim stood alone on the palace balcony. The city lights pulsed in the distance. The chants outside the gate had faded. The silence wasn't peace, but it wasn't war either. It was something in between. A pause, a test, and for now he would wait. The slap came out of nowhere. Mayam staggered back, her book spilling into the red dust. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just stood there blinking at the girl who'd hit her, a girl she once shared lunch with in the school courtyard. A circle had already formed. Students whispering phones halfway out of backpacks. Teachers pretending not to see. "She's the trader's daughter," someone muttered. "She's protected by foreign money," said another. Miriam crouched to gather her papers, hands shaking but steady. One of the boys kicked her notebook across the yard. Laughter rose around her like smoke. She said nothing, just retrieved her belongings and walked away. Dust clinging to her skirt, pride pulled tight around her like armor. That night she didn't speak much at dinner. Her grandmother stirred millet in silence. The air in their home felt thinner. Tamba was still under watch. His name had become fire in the streets. But to Miriam he was still just Papa, flawed, hurting, and trying. Later after midnight, a vehicle stopped outside their house. No sirens, no knock, just a soft voice at the door asking for Mayam. She stepped out barefoot. 2 men in plain clothes stood beside a black SUV, one holding out a sealed Envelope and an ID, presidential seal. No harm, the taller one said gently. You're being invited. Only if you agree. Miriam looked at the envelope, then at her grandmother. The old woman nodded once. Miriam climbed into the back seat, clutching her bag like a lifeline. The city passed in shadows. Markets closed. Mosques silent. At the palace gate, the guards didn't speak. They opened the door, nodded her through. Inside, a woman in a white scarf led her through a quiet corridor. No cameras, no press. President IBRAHIM Traoré stood at the far end of a private courtyard, under the canopy of a jacaranda tree. Purple petals littered the ground around him. He wore no sash, no medals, just a simple shirt and trousers. Miriam approached slowly. He turned eyes warm but tired. You remind me of your father, he said. She swallowed hard. Then I'm sorry. He raised an eyebrow, half smiling. Why? Because he's hurt you, and I'm here because of him. No, Ibrahim said. You're here because of who you are, not because of what he did. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn and soft at the corners. She held it out. My father wrote this when I was born. He kept it in his old army chest. I found it yesterday. Ibrahim took the paper gently, nodding for her to sit beside him on the bench. He unfolded it and began to read silently. The handwriting was rough but clear to the one I could never betray. If you're reading this, it means I've failed in some way. Maybe small, maybe unforgivable. But know this. I was never tempted by money or power. I was tempted by fear. The fear of watching you grow up in a world that could break you faster than I could protect you. But there is one man I could never sell. One country I could never trade. Ibrahim is not just my friend. He is the promise I believed in when I had nothing else. He is the line I swore never to cross. Ibrahim paused. His eyes did not tear, but they softened. He continued reading. So if I fall, let it be on the side of those who tried, not the ones who looked away. And if you ever doubt me, remember this letter. Remember who I wanted to be even when I didn't have the strength to be him. He folded the letter and handed it back. Miriam held it to her chest. He wrote it the night he returned from his last patrol, she said. I was too. Ibrahim leaned back, gazing at the jacaranda branches above them. Do you believe your father can change? He asked. I believe he already has, she said. The petals rustled gently in the wind. A guard approached from the corridor, but stopped short, waiting silently. Ibrahim rose and looked down at Miriam. Thank you for coming. She stood still, holding the letter, and gave a small nod. I don't know what's coming next, he said softly. But I know this much: your father's story isn't over, and neither is yours. Then he turned toward the guard, signaling the escort. Miriam walked back through the halls with her head high, her father's words pressed against her heart. The protest began with a single drum beat. It echoed through the alleyways of Ouagadougou just after sunrise, low and steady like the heartbeat of a city stirring from silence. By noon, the streets were full. Women wrapped in bold, patterned fabric held signs above their heads. Students marched, in rows, hands linked. Old men who had seen too many governments rise and fall leaned on canes and joined without words. Their faces were tight with purpose. Banners stretched across rooftops drawn in chalk and paint and fury. Burkina Faso is not for sale. Our people are not pawns. We choose loyalty over lies. Tamba Dumbaya's name was on every corner. Some chanted, it. Others painted it on their skin. One boy wore it like a badge across his chest, black ink over bare brown skin. To them, he was no longer the fallen guard, the man whose image had been smeared across doctored videos. He was the face of a deeper betrayal, the manipulation of a nation through whispers, bribes, and digital shadows. What had been intended to disgrace him had only revealed the truth. By early afternoon, the protests swelled from one district to 5. Downtown traffic froze. University students shut down classrooms and took to the streets, their chants rising in waves. We choose loyalty over lies. They cried again and again until it felt like something more than a slogan. Until it felt like a vow. The air pulsed with heat, dust, and hope. At the presidential palace, Ibrahim stood by the window, watching. The masses moved like a tide through the capital. His advisors were frantic behind him, phones ringing, radio, crackling screens, flashing warnings. The protests are uncontained, one aide said. We need to issue a statement before foreign media twist this. We could authorize controlled dispersals, another offered. Rubber bullets, tear gas, minimal force. No, Ibrahim said, eyes never leaving the crowd. General Deara stepped forward. Sir, the people are looking for your voice, not just reassurance, direction. Ibrahim turned slowly, then walked toward the center of the room. I've been silent long enough. Within the hour, a stage was built at the edge of Independence Square. No teleprompters, no rehearsals, just a microphone, a flag, and the weight of expectation. As Ibrahim stepped onto the stage, the crowd fell into a hush that felt unnatural in its stillness. Even the chant stopped. It was not fear that silenced them, but gravity. He looked out at them, not above, not apart, among. I see your faces, he said, and I know why you've come. The wind tugged gently at his shirt. A child sat on her father's shoulders, clutching a small paper sign that read, Truth is our future. For too long, he continued. We've allowed others to define our loyalty with their currency, to rewrite our stories with their headlines. They tried to tell you that Tamba Dumbia was a traitor. But I ask you, what do you call a man who stands back up after nearly falling? What do you call a man who in his darkest hour still chose his people? The crowd murmured, voices swelling. You call him one of us, Ibrahim said. Cheers broke through. Some wept. Others raised fists. I will not let foreign hands draw the map of our justice, he said, voice stronger now. We are not a colony. We are not a battlefield for their politics. We are Burkina Faso, upright people. Applause thundered. The crowd surged forward, not in chaos, but unity. To every young person here, he said to every elder, every mother, every student, you are not just the future of this country. You are the shield, the conscience. And today you remind me what leadership really means. He paused, then raised one hand. We choose loyalty over lies, he said. The chant returned louder than before. They shouted it into the wind, into the rooftops, into the heart of the capital until it felt like it belonged to every throat, every soul. Ibrahim stepped down from the stage, walked through the crowd without guards, and nodded to the people as he passed. One woman touched his arm and whispered, We hear you. And for the first time in days he smiled. The courtroom was unlike any other day. For the first time in the country's modern history, a national legal forum was broadcast, live across every network, radio, television, and digital stream. No music played, no commentator interrupted. Just the sound of shuffling papers, heavy footsteps, and the solemn breath of a nation holding its silence. The hall was packed. Judges in ceremonial robes sat high at the front, their expressions carved in stone. Rows of military officers, politicians, student leaders, and international observers filled every bench. At the far end, cameras rolled quietly, their red lights blinking. The screen above the dais read National Forum on Truth and Interference. When Tamba Dumbia walked in, no applause greeted him, no gasps, just stillness. He wore a plain shirt, no tie, no medals. His eyes met no one's. He walked like a man carrying a burden, not seeking to drop it but to explain it. He was called to the stand without ceremony. A judge leaned forward. Mr. Dumbia, this forum is not a trial in the traditional sense. It is an opportunity for public clarity. You may speak. You are not required to defend yourself, but the nation is watching. Tamba nodded once. Then he pulled a small black envelope from his jacket and placed it on the desk. I have nothing to defend, he began. What I did, I did. What I did not do. I'll explain. But I'm not here to clean my name. I am here to protect my country's name. The judge gave a silent signal and the cameras zoomed in. Tamba opened the envelope and laid out 5 sheets of paper, each marked with foreign government insignias, clumsily redacted financial transfers, shell company documents, lists of bribes. Then he placed a flash drive on the table. This, he said, pointing to it, contains voice recordings between myself and 2 foreign operatives named Julian Morrow and Elva Kasayer, posing as development agents, working directly under the cover of Western economic coalitions. The room remained, hushed, but a few ministers leaned forward. Tamba continued. These people didn't want just one man's secrets. They wanted this country divided, its president discredited, its youth discouraged. They offered me money. Then they offered me lies. And when I didn't give them what they wanted, they used what I had touched to burn me publicly. He held up a transcript. This is a written version of a conversation I had with Julian Morrow. In it, he tells me directly that President Traoré's fall would be a necessary correction. His words, not mine. The correction, he said, would allow a return to stable foreign relations and easier investment. That means debt. That means control, he looked up. I was a fool to let them sit across from me, but I never gave them what they needed. And when I realized what they were building, I gave what I knew to the people who would use it for truth, not power. An aide approached the bench and plugged in the drive. Within seconds, audio played over the speakers, grainy, but clear. Julian's voice, Ila's laughter, the subtle, deliberate tone of manipulation. One segment played twice. He's a man of loyalty. Break that, and the rest of the structure falls. Focus on Tamba. The rest will follow. The room shifted, shoulders straightened, eyes narrowed. Tamba waited. When the audio stopped, he spoke once more. I have no illusions about who I am. I made choices out of fear. But I came back out of something stronger, and that was because of this country, because of my daughter, because of a man who trusted me when no one else would. My loyalty may have been shaken, but it was never sold. Not truly. A long silence followed. Then from the back someone stood. A woman in a headscarf, then a man in military uniform, then a student, and another. They didn't speak. They just stood, inside the hall. The sound of chairs scraping back grew louder. Outside, people watching on televisions in markets and homes began clapping, then cheering, then chanting. Inside, the judge banged the gavel not for silence but to hold the moment. This forum, he said, was never about punishing a man. It was about naming a disease. We have now seen it, and we will not forget it. The cameras kept rolling and the nation stood still. Then breathed together, not in anger but in belief. The press hall at the presidential palace had never been so full. Reporters from across the continent filled every seat, camera crews packed the aisles, and lights blazed from every angle. Outside, crowds gathered in silence around massive screens erected in public squares. Even school children were dismissed early. In the markets, radios were turned up. In the villages, old men adjusted antennas with trembling hands. Everyone waited for a voice that had remained quiet far too long. When IBRAHIM TRAORÉ stepped to the podium, the room did not erupt. It inhaled. He wore no formal uniform, no golden chain of office, just a dark shirt and a calm face. He stood behind the microphone, rested his hands lightly on the edge of the podium, and looked into the crowd, not with the eyes of a politician, but of a man who had seen his country fracture, and still believed it could be made whole. For the past weeks, he began, we have been tested not only by foreign pressure, not only by deceit, but by doubt. Doubt in one another, doubt in ourselves, doubt in our future. The room remained still. He took a breath. There is a name that has been whispered in markets, screamed in protests, printed in headlines. Tamba Doumbia. A murmur rippled through the room. I have watched the footage, he said. I have heard the lies and the truths, and I have listened to the people, to the evidence, and to my own heart. He paused, the silence stretching like a taut string. Tamba was not just a man, he said. He was a mirror of our struggle, a son of this land. He was tempted, like many of us have been, by fear and desperation. But in the moment that mattered most, he chose truth. He chose country. He chose us. At that, a few in the back clapped, then more. But he raised a hand gently, asking for quiet. Some will say that weakness is failure. I disagree. Weakness is human. Treason is the refusal to return. And Tamba returned. He leaned slightly forward. I, IBRAHIM TRAORÉ, President of Burkina Faso, do hereby grant a full pardon to Tamba Doumbia. The press gasped. But outside, in the streets of Ouagadougou, the cheers were instant. Wild, unscripted car horns blared. People hugged strangers. Some simply cried and held radios to their hearts. Inside the palace, a side door opened. Tamba Doumbia walked out slowly, hesitantly. He had not been told this would happen. His shirt was plain, his shoes dusty. He looked smaller than before, as if the burden of weeks had pressed down every part of him. IBRAHIM turned to him and stepped back from the podium. The two men faced each other. Tamba's lips trembled. I thought I'd never stand in this room again, he said softly, voice shaking. IBRAHIM nodded once. And yet you're here. Tamba looked out at the flashing cameras, the sea of eyes. I didn't come back to clear my name. I came back because I couldn't carry the weight of silence. I betrayed no one with words, but I betrayed myself by staying quiet. I am not proud of my fear, but I am proud that I didn't let it define me forever. His voice cracked. I am sorry, he said. Then, without warning, his knees gave out and he dropped to the floor. Not from collapse, but by choice, kneeling, arms limp at his sides, not as a gesture of submission, but of release. Cameras clicked. Some gasped, but no one moved. Tumbo wept openly, deep shaking sobs that echoed through the microphones and out, into living rooms and radios. He made no effort to wipe his tears. He let them fall. Ibrahim stepped forward and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. He said nothing, but the gesture said everything. Later that night, across television screens and mobile phones, the moment replayed again and again, the pardon, the embrace, the tears. It became the most watched broadcast in Burkina Faso's history. Not because of politics, not because of scandal, but because in a world full of vengeance and spectacle, two men had reminded a nation what grace could look like. The road to Koudégout was red and winding, the kind that left dust clinging to every tire, every boot, every heartbeat. The sun rose, slowly behind the presidential convoy, casting long golden lines across the bushland. But this was no formal visit, no military parade, no flags, just two old friends in the back seat of a plain black SUV, riding in silence toward the place where everything had begun. Ibrahim looked out the window as the familiar landmarks passed, by a broken fence post near the old well. A weathered hut with a tin roof still patched by the same blue tarp from their childhood. He hadn't been here in years, not since the campaign that launched him into office. Back then they had paraded through the village with drums and songs, but today he wanted none of that. He wanted something quieter, truer. Beside him, Tamba adjusted, the small box in his lap. Inside it was a sapling, a mango tree just a few feet tall, its leaves still tender, its roots wrapped in damp cloth. It had been chosen days ago quietly from the national nursery. Tamba had insisted on carrying it himself. As the vehicle slowed near the edge of the village, children began to gather. Some wore school uniforms. Others ran barefoot. But all of them stopped to stare as the door opened and the president stepped out, followed by the man who had once been his shadow, then, nearly his undoing. No one clapped. No one shouted. But the silence that greeted them was not cold. It was reverent, as if the land itself remembered. An elder approached Cain, tapping the ground in slow rhythm. His name was Sori, and he had once scolded them both for stealing mangoes from the very tree they were here to replace. You came back. Sorry, said his voice thin but steady. Ibrahim bowed slightly. We had to. He turned to Tamba, who nodded, then carried the sapling toward the open patch of earth near the center of the village. The old mango tree had been struck by lightning 10 years ago. What remained was a stump, gnarled and gray. A group of boys stood nearby with shovels already digging. Dirt flew into the air as laughter broke out among them. It was the kind of laughter only children could offer, unconcerned with past sins, full of new breath. Tamba knelt beside them, hands in the dirt, guiding the roots gently into place. His sleeves were rolled up. Sweat beaded at his temples. He didn't speak. He just worked. Ibrahim crouched beside him, cupping the soil around the base. Then he paused, placed his palm flat on the earth, and closed his eyes for a moment. This is for those who make mistakes, he said softly, and fix them. A breeze passed through the clearing. The leaves of nearby trees rustled like quiet applause. More villagers gathered now. Men with lined faces, women holding toddlers, girls in headscarves. No one asked for speeches. No one needed them. They came to see, to witness, to remember. When the tree stood upright, watered and wrapped with a single ribbon of cloth, Ibrahim stepped back and looked at Tamba. They had shared many silences over the years, some joyful, some heavy. But this one felt like healing. Tamba wiped his hands on his pants and looked around the village. It's smaller than I remember, he said. Ibrahim smiled. No, we just got bigger. They walked together toward the center of the crowd. An old woman handed them each a gourd of millet drink. They drank slowly, then handed it back. A young girl tugged on Tamba's sleeve. Is it true you were on television? She asked. He knelt to her level. Yes, but this is the only place I wanted to be seen. She giggled and ran back, to her friends. Ibrahim looked at the people around him. This village raised us, fed us, taught us to share even when we had nothing. Sori nodded and still does. The sun dipped lower. The sapling stood firm in its place. Some of the children had begun to draw names in the dirt nearby. One wrote hope in block letters, then traced a heart beside it. Before leaving, Ibrahim turned, back to the tree. He touched its trunk lightly, then looked at Tamba. "Next time we come back," he said, "it'll be taller than us." Tamba nodded, his voice low and stronger. They embraced not as